Serious, Redditors who are no longer in contact with their parents. What was the final straw? My parents divorced when I was 3. Until my teenage years I had regular contact with my dad, but it was pretty clear that he prioritized his new family. His second wife was insanely jealous and hated me. That's kind of hard to understand as a kid, so I just came out of it with a huge inferiority complex. After I moved away from home, I had a bitterness and resentment phase, and broke off contact with my dad. That lasted for 10+ years until my son was born. My dad started sending birthday and Christmas gifts, and I thought, oh what the heck, he should see his grandchild. So I invited him over to stay for a couple of days. He had divorced again and was single. Well, he arrived, and we had nothing to talk about. It was awkward. His luggage was a plastic bag full of wine bottles. When I got up the next morning, they were all empty. After he left we just didn't talk again. It's been 17 years. From what I hear he's now married for the 3rd time, to a woman who shares his love for red wine. So I guess he's happy. Probably based on my life experience, I think blood relationships are overrated. There's nothing special about sharing the same genes. Find your family among people who are there for you and appreciate you for who you are. Last bit really reflects my view. You didn't get to choose your family. Sure, they might be great, but I'd rather surround myself with people I really care about. There's nothing special to me about my blood relatives, and it drives me nuts when they try to defend the crappy members of our family because they're family. My mother is a complete narcissist. My brother OD'd and she turned his funeral into a fiasco. Invite tons of people who didn't know him or didn't like him. She changed the death date on the announcement so people wouldn't know what happened. The clincher for me though, she got up to the podium and said that he wouldn't have been so depressed. He was a paranoid schizophrenic with early onset. If I, his sister, had been nicer to him. It's been over 3 years and I finally don't feel angry or hurt anymore. She got up to the podium and said that he wouldn't have been so depressed. He was a paranoid schizophrenic with early onset. If I, his sister, had been nicer to him. Holy crap, that is absolutely unforgivable. I guess he left the state when I was 12. Next time I heard from him was my 21st birthday. It was a self-pitying missive about how much he missed me. I responded something to the tune of, "B, you owe me 100 grand in child support and I'm not the one who changed my address and phone number in 2002. He shot back with more delusional self-pitying garbage. And now I try to ignore my annual birthday ruining message. They both ditched me as a kid and left me to grow up in the system. I have no interest in having contact with them even though for several years now they have both separately tried to contact me. They are biologically my parents but that is it. I slowly started having less and less contact with them when I went into foster care at 15. Final straw was long before that, but legally I couldn't block them out of my life until I turned 18. But I could wean myself off them bit by bit until that day. I think the final straw was probably the day I finally got out. She had called the police saying I threatened to kill my younger siblings. I had been locked in my room since I had come home from school and hadn't even spoken to anyone else. The cop that came that night gave me a choice on how I could finally leave that crappy abusive situation and I took it. The final straw was when I walked downstairs with the cop and she was tearfully saying how I shouldn't go and how much she'd miss me and on and on. After the years of heck and horror she put me through I was just done and I knew as soon as I could I would be cutting her and her husband out of my life. Went no contact the day I turned 18 and haven't spoken to either for 7 years. One of the best decisions I have ever made. My mom died suddenly when I was 12 and my father immediately started pawning off my developmentally delayed brother and myself on anyone he could. He eventually convinced a woman to marry him less than a year after our amazing mother had died very suddenly. New stepmother did not want kids and made that clear from day one. I was kicked out at 15. 1/2, 16. I had to call CPS on my parents so I could finish high school and have a place to sleep. Finally when I got kicked out at 17 I left for good and graduated while living in a 1-bedroom apt with 2 friends. A couple years after that, they gave my brother to a family I'd never met. They're wonderful and love him, but it's still infuriating. My parents are very much divorced and hate each other, mostly due to my father's rampant alcoholism. At 17, I joined the army to be less of a burden on my mother, get some kind of a future going, and served active time, joined the guard, and went to college, and got swept up into the ball of fun that happened after 9/11 with a few deployments. When I came home for the last time, I decided to reach out to my father, drove to his house, thought we could have a decent conversation for once since it was early and he couldn't possibly be intoxicated before 10 AM. I was wrong. First words out of his mouth was, "So how many ragheads did you get to kill?" I just looked at the ground and realized it was futile. A few years later, I met the girl of my dreams and got engaged when I invited him to the wedding. No RSVP. I called him and asked if he got the invitation. He said he did. I asked him if he was going to come with my grandmother, and he said he wasn't, which means grandma didn't have a ride. And when I asked why he wasn't coming, he told me because we're not that close. I asked him how he expected to get closer to his son if he didn't want to come to my wedding or meet his new daughter, and he hung up. And that was it. To be fair, my father is also a veteran and by all accounts, got a little scrambled in Vietnam. But I told him when and if he decides to sober himself up, I will be ready to pick up the phone. My new fear is that we are gearing up to attempt to have a kid, and my grandfathers both played such a huge element in my life that I don't quite understand what a childhood would be without one. But I remember being a young kid and being driven around by this guy who was beyond intoxicated, being beaten in public for no reason, being taken fishing, which was fun in the morning but got horrible after the drinking took effect. I fear that when and if we have a kid, he will actively want to be in the kid's life, and the kid will be exposed to all the evils that I was exposed to. I was always torn between my parents after the divorce. I was about 9 at the time and it seemed like even after that they were always fighting and attacking each other. My emotional state was pretty crappy for a couple years after that. I eventually just kinda stopped talking to my dad. No particular reason, but he called on my birthday and stuff. By the time I turned 15 I was feeling much better about everything in my life and ended up saving my education because of it. There were a few things that happened in between graduation and Father's Day, but Father's Day was the last straw. He called me and asked if I wanted to come to his hometown for Father's Day, which I reluctantly agreed to because of what happened on graduation. Then he started to, completely unprovoked, bash my mom for at least 5 minutes straight. Everything negative emotion I had when I was little, every struggle I had with my parents, came back to life in those 5 minutes. And then I realized he caused literally all of them. He was manipulating me into believing my mom was a devil and I almost bought into it. I hung up and haven't talked to him again since. It's been 4 years. I was 16 and I wouldn't lie in court about my mother so he could get out of child support for me and my little brothers, so he kicked me out of the house at 2 AM in February. He tried to make it up to me later and instead ended up shoving me against a wall so hard I fell and lost my breath. First thing out of his mouth, "You fell, be yourself and my new wife will vouch for me if you try to tell anyone otherwise." Never looked back or talked to him again. What a piece of crap. Glad you moved on. I haven't spoken or seen my father in about 7 years. He was a horrible father who hit my mother throughout my whole life, and even before I was born. Mom sent him to prison twice for domestic violence, but she always went back to him as she thought it would be better to take care of me with 2 parents in the picture. Final straw was when my dad went apeshit in front of me at my mom and she fled the house with me and got a restraining order straight away. There's a lot more crap to the story, but I won't get into it too much. The coward fled the house with all the valuables before the cops showed up at the door to escort him out. I am so happy that he's gone and I hope that for as long as I live I never see that piece of crap. My parents split when I was 5. I moved states with my mom, but I used to visit my dad over the summer. He put me in summer camp so I would really only see him after he picked me up and before he dropped me off. He used to beat the crap out of me and frick me up mentally. He was a foster kid that had abusive alcoholic parents, so of course he carried on the tradition. When I was 10 he hit me so hard he broke my nose. I stole his gun and tried to kill him, but I was 10 so I wasn't really sure how to use it. I just didn't know what else to do. My plan failed and somehow he convinced the family it was all my fault. I was committed for 6 months. I was diagnosed with depression. anxiety, suicidal tendencies. I wasn't bipolar and manic. No one believed my case. My dad was an amazing people person, as well as a con man, and had everyone convinced of his story, even me for a while. I haven't seen him since I was 10. My mom is on her 5th divorce. She owes me thousands of dollars, which I gave up on years ago. She is still on drugs, drinks, smokes and job hops like no other. She is also a great people person and somehow gets everyone to feel sorry for her. Her negativity is a gaping black hole that will suck you in. I can't be around her, despite living in the same city. I haven't seen her for about 5 years. I have 2 sisters, same mom, that saw things for what they were up until a few years ago. Now the sisters have written me off as the bad sheep and they continue to see my mother. I never see my nephew or nieces and that sucks. I was kicked out of my house when I was 14. I was homeless but managed to hop around from friend to friend for at least a place to stay. When I was 15 I was adopted. Basically my best friend's mom took me in. It was awesome. More family than my family. I had 2 new brothers, a new sister and a great mom for years. This lasted for years. For about the past 3-4 years, we are in less and less contact. Older brother moved away to army. Younger brother moved into his own place, got married and had a kid. Younger sister got married and moved to her own place. I kept trying, inviting myself over, inviting them over, having BBQs, etc. Every event became less frequent. The excuses kept growing. Now it's a shocker to get a Facebook message. I don't blame them. I'm not family. The younger brother's wife reminds me of it every time I see her. It makes crap hard. I am sorry for what you've gone through. I hope that you've come to shake off the miserable people and experiences from your past. Please accept a hug from an internet stranger. After years of physical and mental abuse from my father, the physical part stopped and I started to realize that the sentiment of blood is thicker than water is a bunch of bulls and not something that excuses horrible behavior from a parent. The mental and emotional abuse continued every time we talked on the phone or saw each other. Any way he could have tried to manipulate or control my life was attempted and created so much stress and havoc that I just broke and told him he had to stop his behavior or I would have no choice but to stop talking to him. He told me I wouldn't have to put up with his behavior if I didn't do things to warrant it, so I hung up and decided to wash my hands of him for good. She left me when I was 3. B started a new family without me, and that is why I don't and won't make contact with my parents. I served in the USMC and was deployed to Iraq in 2004. I trusted my mother with my power of attorney, thinking she would have my best interest at heart. For my pay grade and time served overseas, I should have come home to $34K, a nice sum piled up to start my young life. However, when I returned to the States and checked my bank balance, there was less than $4,000. My mother had spent my money buying nice gifts for my brother and her boyfriend, including college tuition and a new Jeep. That was 10 years ago, and I haven't spoken to her since the day I found my account balance and was told what she did. Just cause she had power of attorney doesn't mean you are powerless to get the money back. Kicking me out of the house 3 days before I left for basic military training, because I had the gall to make sure she didn't kill herself when she was completely s-faced will do it. It's like that guy who sued Mr. Incredible for saving him. She died. That kinda ended that. My father left when I was 1 and no matter how abusive he was I always forgave him. After my mom died he got really bad, calling me just to tell me I'm worthless. It was in July 2011 when I called to say I had set up a band account like he asked so he could send child support to my stepfather who would take care of me. He called my stepfather pathetic for wanting another man's help. No one insults my stepdad, sure as heck not when he is raising me as his own daughter. That was the moment it ended with my father. Sounds like you have a real father anyways. I lived a carefully balanced double life when I lived with them and even for a while after I moved out on my own. It was easier to just stop talking to them than it was to maintain a double identity. I have tried a few times to invite them back into my life, but it hasn't worked. I don't fit their idea of the person I should be and am living a life completely opposite of what they think I should. Our conversations always ended up with being lectured on needing to change my path and make right choices, and me trying to get them to understand that, even at the close of my 20s, my life is my own and that I'm actually happy in life. Frustrating and depressing and all around not good for me. I'm going to make one final attempt to prop the bridge up and open the road again, but if they don't make any effort, I'm gonna let that mother burn. I am no longer in contact with my paternal grandmother or anyone else on my dad's side. Neither is my dad, only when he is forced to. The final straw was when my grandma lied about my aunt, her dill, kicking her out of the house, and so she had to move in with us. She always looked down on my mom for not being Chinese, and our family for not being as rich. My mom was always good to her because she lost her own at the age of 12, and despite all the crap my grandma flung at her, my mom always made sure to do nice things for her. So she moves in with us, and then 3 days later, she called up the rest of the family and accused my mom for kicking her out as well. All this so that she can't move in with her first and favorite grandson. There was a huge fight, everyone making my mom the scapegoat. My dad's brothers' wives took it as an advantage to pin all the blame on my mom. I basically called my dad's sister a self-righteous C, and from then on, I swore to stay away from such poisonous, vindictive people. There are many things my grandmother did to my mom, and all of them discriminative and malicious. I will post them if anyone wants to know. My mom and I don't stop my dad from seeing his family, but he has avoided them off his own accord. Even on the one time he did happen to see them, the supposedly perfect children are disrespectful to him. They have no part of my life, and as far as I know, they are not family. She left when I was 4 and never looked back. She was never interested in being a mom in the first place, and I guess her depression and personal issues got the best of her. She would make excuses not to show up for her weekly visitation with me, and when she would stop by, she spent more time talking to my grandparents than interacting with me. One day she came by as usual, left the house saying I'll see you guys next week, got in the car where her mother was waiting for her, said she was done with all of this, that my family treats her like a second-class citizen. Never wanted to speak of this again and rode off into the sunset. To be quite honest, after what she did to herself, and subsequently me, I'm better off without her. As for my father, I see him during family functions, but our relationship is so strained and tumultuous that it wouldn't bother me in the least if I never heard from him again. I know that sounds very harsh, but it's the God's honest truth. My dad was an abusive alcoholic. He couldn't keep a job from his drinking, and it was a normal occurrence growing up not to have a car because he'd wreck them constantly. My mom was at her wit's end and gave him an ultimatum: booze or the family. He chose the booze. He moved down to Florida with his parents and became a beach bum. I made an attempt to reconcile with him a number of years ago. It was labored, but we were making progress. I'd call him faithfully every week. One day, he said that because I was so good at calling him, that he was going to make the next phone call as a good gesture. It's been 14 years. My mum is an alco who persuaded me as a teen to cut off contact with my dad. Never been sure if she genuinely believed he was cheating on her or it was a convenient lie to be able to take me back to her home country. Long story short, he didn't fight hard enough, and after months of increasingly erratic behavior, I came home one day to my younger sibling saying he had to drag her to bed because she had passed out in the hallway. That was where I internally realized something had to happen. She ran out of money from the divorce settlement soon after, hadn't bothered to get a job for a year, and we were kicked out of our house, and she decided we had to move 1,000 miles away again, and confiscated my phone so I couldn't contact my poisonous father. Took my passport and tried to take our money too, you know, as a precaution, in case I did something stupid. We got out and dad rescued us, despite everything, and got a court order saying she was unfit. But none of that was the last straw. We kept ringing her from back at my dad's place to maintain contact, but all the phone calls were about how we had wronged her, how my dad had wronged her, and how we should never believe a thing he says, how we should make him pay for us to come visit her after the passport issue before Eventually I realized she is locked in a situation of loathing and bitterness that I am not interested in, and is entirely of her own creation. I'm a way at getting at my father, not really of interest in my own right. Sometimes you just have to say, oh well, because it's nothing to do with you. She had the opportunity to try to mend our relationship, but she can't really be bothered. She's more interested in wreaking some imagined revenge on my father than being my mother. I should probably be using a throwaway for this, but frick it, why not? I stopped talking to my mother after she called me up drunk 2 days before my birthday to tell me how much of a failure I was and how I'd end up as big a failure as my dad, who makes more money than her and has a spouse, so that doesn't make much sense. Full stop. I let go of all of the rage I'd held up for 14 years, physical and mental abuse when I was a kid. She never knew when to stop drinking, went to rehab and proceeded to keep drinking, etc. Telling her how she was the failure, not me, and that when I have a child I'll make sure to raise him her better than she raised me. I stopped talking to her and she tried to regain custody of me 6 months after the incident. She works for child services. I've learned 80% of the city is corrupt because of this. I proceeded to provide proof to my caseworker, who was later imprisoned for tax evasion, and the FBI is still investigating her to this day of what she had said to me at that time and everything she had said to me up until that point. I never trusted that lady and I'm glad she's in prison. Around the time this was all happening, I had gotten into the best private high school in the area and my stepmother was working for one of the most successful law offices in the state, so she was able to use her influence to free me from the grasp of these crazy people who can't wrap their heads around a woman not being able to be a good parent. I'm graduating from high school next year and I've been able to be led some of my school's retreats. Religious school takes a lot of pride in their retreats and I can see why, and speak about the entire incident as well as my experiences that resulted from it. Overall, I wouldn't change the entire experience, and as of right now I have no intention of speaking to her ever again. You have been visited by the Wealth Rat. Subscribe in 12 seconds and he will share his wealth with you. Like and subscribe, you magnificent person.